Recap to summarize how far we've come, and then we'll look at today's lesson. And in the first week that I spoke about the need for us to reset our definition of what true wealth is. And I gave you 9 indicators of what true wealth is. And I hope you can remember those, that they will enrich you and confirm again that we are not poor. Having come to know Christ and his promises, and with all the beautiful things that God has done for us, we are not poor. And we cannot call ourselves hustlers, even though we might like the fanciness of the name of the title itself. We are not poor. In the second week, my desire was to reset what I understand to be the foundation of all wealth building. And what we said in the second week is that God is the giver of wealth. And as Christians, we have nothing against wealth. It is a gift of God. But we also said that when God blesses with wealth, there are expectations that he places on us. And one of those is that we would be faithful in giving back to the one who has given us. And we also said that it makes no sense at all that we would try and build wealth asking God for wealth when we're robbing him and stealing from him. It makes no sense at all. Last week, which was the third sermon, we were talking about resetting your budgets because they are a vehicle for wealth. And we looked at Jesus' story of the man who desires to build. And we said, you must have a goal. So I pray that you did go back home and sit down and ask yourself, what is my vision, my goal? Because without a vision, a people perish. And I hope that you are able to write down what your goal is and where you're going and what it is you're asking God for, and you're clear on that. But then we also said that on top of a goal, you need a plan, because a goal without a plan is a pipe dream. And so to sit down and to say, Lord, here's what I would like to do by this day, by this time, to have done this, and I'm asking, as a giver of wealth, would you hear my cry and would you make it possible? And then after you've put down a plan, you must count, as Jesus said, count whether you have enough to be able to accomplish what you have begun. And if you don't, then to consider and think through, how can I then be able to finish what I have begun? And if it comes to it, to go back to your Father in heaven and tell him, Lord, I can only go so far. And I'm asking you in your goodness, please, please, please add to what I have so that I can fulfill the vision to create wealth. I want to begin by sort of recapping last week, okay? And giving you what I consider to be the 7 indicators, because we said this last week. If you're living on beyond 60% of your income, and remember by income I mean not what your boss says he pays you in terms of your gross, but what your boss pays you in terms of what is deposited into your account as your salary. If you're living on more than 60% of your income, you're living beyond your means. And I hope you sat down and, did your budget and thought it through and came to the conclusion, I need to do X, Y, Z to be able to live within my means. And we said that, a 10% goes to a tithe, a 10% goes to prepare for the later years of your life, and etc. But here's how you know, 7 indicators as to whether you're living beyond your means. Number 1, you never have any money left over at the end of the month. It's an indicator that you're living beyond your means. Number 2, your bills are spiraling out of control and you feel overwhelmed by the bills and how fast they're coming at you. You hardly have time to finish paying one off and the next one is knocking at the doorstep. Number 3, you carry a balance on your credit card. Very good indicator of whether you're living beyond your means. Number 4 is you have no emergency fund at all. You have not put aside anything for a crisis and an emergency. Number 5 is you hide what you buy. That latest pair of shoes that the husband never knows about until one day he asks, are these new? And he says, oh, I've had them for the last couple of, months. And you're hiding the purchase you've made. Number 6, you borrow loans from friends and from family and from workmates regularly, and you're at the place where you have to borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and then from Susan to pay Peter, and then from Janet to pay Susan, and then from David to pay Janet, and it never ends. The bill isn't being taken care of. You're just borrowing and reborrowing and reborrowing to pay the bills that you have from friends, from family, from workmates, and from wherever you can. And then number 7, your total debt repayment. If you're to sit down and calculate what I owe Peter, what I owe my SACCO, what I owe the bank, what's on my credit card, your total repayment on those bills exceeds 30% of your take-home income each month. Very good indicator that you're living way beyond your means. But we talked about this last week. Proverbs 21 and verse 20 says, the fool spends his money as fast as he gets it. The New International Bible even puts it better and says this, the fool gulps down his money. He eats it in mouthfuls, hop, 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 and it never lasts. They never create wealth that way. The wise man builds little by little like an ant, and in the season of plenty, they store away for the season of need. And it's going to come. Today, I want to go on to a new principle, okay? And I want to reset our understanding of how to create wealth, okay? And to build up a wealth creation industry. I want us to turn to Exodus chapter 3, and I'm going to paraphrase the beginning of it, and then we'll read from verse 7, okay? Exodus chapter 3 is where Moses comes to the burning bush. And he sees this bush that is aflame and it's not burning up. And his curiosity leads him there. And God tells him, take off your shoes because this is holy ground. And he does. And then God tells him, I want to send you to rescue the people of Israel. And Moses does everything he can to resist and turn down the call that God is making on his life. He doesn't want to go. He's afraid of Pharaoh. He doesn't know that he will survive the Egyptians. He doesn't want to go. And I want to pick up the verse, or rather the reading in verse 7 through to verse 11, and then jump over to chapter 4. Here is verse 7. The Lord told Moses, I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. Verse 11. But Moses protested to the Lord and said, Who am I? Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And he kept making excuses, excuse after excuse. I can't speak well, I stutter. Not me, Lord, send somebody else. And finally, God, in exasperation, speaks to him in chapter 4. And I want to read verse 1 to 4. And he says this, But Moses protested one more time. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked Moses, "What is that in your hands?" "A shepherd's staff," Moses replied. "Throw it down on the ground," the Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff, and it turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. Then the Lord told him, "Reach out and grab its tail." So Moses, possibly hesitantly, afraid, reached back towards this snake that was on the ground. Moses reached out and grabbed it by the tail, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hands. God asked Moses, "What's that in your hands?" It's the same question that he asked in the book of Judges. Several people. He asked Samson, "What is that in your hands?" And Samson said, "The jawbone of an ass." He asked someone else, Shamgar, "What's that in your hands?" And he said, "An ox goad." You know, one of these Maasai sticks that the Maasais carry when they're looking after their cows and their sheep and their goat. An ox goad. And God used that to defeat the Philistines. He asked of Deborah, "What's that in your hand?" And it was a tent peg to hold down a tent. And he used it through Deborah to defeat the Canaanites. He asked Gideon, "What's that in your hands?" And it was a trumpet and jars of clay. And he used those to defeat the Midianites. And he asked David, "What's that in your hand?" And all David had was a slingshot, a catapult. And David used that catapult to bring down the giant Goliath. God can use anything to win because the battle belongs to him. And it's not the implement in your hand that wins the battle. It is a God who stands behind you that brings victory. The implement is but a small excuse to involve you in what he has decided to do. In Exodus chapter 4, Moses' stick was important to him because it was a symbol of his profession. As a shepherd with his father-in-law's sheep and whatever else, he needed the shepherd's stick to be able to control them. It was a symbol of his profession. It was also a mark of his authority when it came to the sheep that he looked after. And it was in some ways also a mark of his identity as a shepherd. As long as that stick was in Moses' hands, it was a dead stick that had no life in its own. But once Moses identified that stick and then gave it over to God's use, it became a living thing that had a life of its own and its own power. Did you hear me? As long as he identified it and gave it over in obedience to God, then it became a living thing. After it had come alive, when Moses took it back in his hand and he was in control of it, it became a dead thing and it was a stick again. May I suggest to you that there are some of you here who are clutching and holding on to dead careers that are going nowhere. There are some here who have dead dreams that will never be fulfilled. There are some of us here who even have dead marriages and dead futures because we hold on to them. And as long as they're in our hands and being controlled by us, they will never amount to anything. They are dead. Only when we recognize and name them and give them to God do they come alive and have the hope of ever achieving what we have so longed for. And so if you are, what are the dead things in your life that you need to give over to God? As long as you hold on to them, they're going in the wrong direction. They deeply frustrate you. You hope and hope and hope you can turn things around, but they never seem to, and they just spiral out of control. God asked Moses, "What's that in your hand?" That simple, seemingly useless little thing that God then turns into a life thing. Let me tell you a story. I was having a casual conversation with one of our members at the chapel, and they told me how bees had come into their home and entered one of the pots on their compound. And they didn't know what to do with those bees, and they wanted to get an exterminator to come and remove them because, these bees could sting their children and etc., and it could end in disaster. But even as they called the exterminator to come and kill the bees, they thought to themselves, what if this is God's blessing to me? What if it is God who has sent these bees to me? And instead of telling the exterminator, come and remove them and kill them all, they told the exterminator, bring me a hive, an empty hive, and take these bees and put them in it, and let me begin to produce honey. And they did. And at the time that I was talking with them, those bees had produced honey, they had multiplied, and they had swarmed, and they had entered a second hive that she put out, and a third hive, and she had begun a little cottage industry of honey for sale from what had been before a useless thing that she wanted to get rid of. What's that in your hand? I'm not a very clever guy. But when she told me her story, I said, even me. Why not? And the good thing about bees is they go into your neighbor's compound and they steal their honey and bring to you. They never take a sick day off. They never ask for annual leave. They don't even ask for a salary. They'll just make honey for you free of charge, day by day by day. Immediately the sun comes up, they're out working for you. And they will keep working for you until the sun goes down. So I said, even me, I went and bought my hives. I have 12 hives now. I'm not a very clever guy, but I know how to copy. So here's the truth about wealth creation for us as the children of God. What's that in your hand? Name it and give it to the Lord and ask Him to bring it alive and use it to create wealth for you. I'm taking that principle and using it in my own life right now. So let me enumerate some of the ways that I'm trying to create wealth in my own life right now, okay? I'm a salaried man, and so I do get a salary as a pastor and etc. That's good, okay? But in these days of Corona, you go and ask your boss, give me more, and he says, we're hardly surviving as an organization. There is no more. You ask, give me a promotion. There are no spaces for promotion. In fact, if they can downsize, they would be very happy. And so that income is unlikely to grow. And you're probably in the same place. You're just happy that things are stable. But you need more. So you ask the question, what's that in your hands? And can God use it to create wealth for me? So I'll tell you a couple of things in my hands. One of the things in my hands is I have a love for dogs. I love dogs. I love them big. I love them nasty. I love them curly. And so I have always kept Rottweilers for the pure love of the dog. And more recently, I've also started keeping Bobels, those big, ugly mastiffs from South Africa that have drooping lips and that are normally drooping saliva as though they can't wait to get their teeth into you. Let me tell you the economics of making money off dogs, okay? And I don't even keep mine because I'm trying to make money off them. But as I sat down with this realization of that question that God asked Moses, what's that in your hands? And it was a dead something, and God brought it alive. I sat down with a pen and paper and I began to write what God has put in my hands. One of them is my dogs. Never thought of them as money, possible wealth creation. But these are the economics of a dog. If you don't, skimp and get one of these Shenzi dogs from Ushago, leave those ones, okay? You get a proper dog, okay? You get a dog with a pedigree. You know what a pedigree is? It is the birth certificate of the dog that shows at least 4 or 5 generations of the dog. It's a better birth certificate than yours. Yours only shows your mother and father. With dogs, you have to go to the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the great-great-grandparents to show the purity of the blood, the bloodline of the dog itself. That's what is called a pedigree. The pedigree is in the dog. It's a birth certificate that comes with the dog, okay? You get a pedigree dog, okay? And a pedigree dog will cost you money. Each of my Rottweilers cost me 90,000 shillings each. And the same with the Bobels. I have 1 male Rottweiler and 1 female Rottweiler. I have 1 male Bobel and 2 females. So count the money. It's over 250,000, maybe even closer to 500,000 shillings. Why would anyone spend that sort of money on a dog? I'll tell you why. My Rottweiler, that cost me 90,000 shillings, and my female, you look after them and they guard you. That's why I have them. And I love dogs. That's why I have them. But the economics of those dogs is that when they give birth, the female gives birth, and it is a pure breed, and I can register the puppies with the Kennel Club of Kenya, and I get the pedigree for the dog, I can sell each of those puppies for 90,000 shillings. My Bobel regularly gives me 10 puppies each time that it gives birth. I have 1 male and 2 females. That's 20 puppies a year. By the time you sell them, you'll spend about 20,000 shillings on each dog because they don't eat leftovers from the kitchen. You can tell a dog owner when they are in neighbors. You know what they fill their cart with? Weetabix. I had a friend who told me how he was once keeping dogs, and no matter how much food he brought for his puppies, they seemed to be growing thinner and thinner and thinner. Finally, he asked a guy who looked after the dogs, "What's wrong with these dogs of mine?" And as he watched and listened and tried to figure it out, he figured out all that Weetabix I'm buying, this guy is taking home and giving them the leftovers from, from the other animals and such. They don't eat leftovers. They eat eggs, and they eat chicken, and they eat Weetabix. And by the time you're done with them, because they're sold at 8 weeks, they have eaten at least 20,000 shillings worth. But you're going to sell them at 100,000. And the profit margin is so big. If you have 20 a year, do the quick maths. How much are you making each year on 20 puppies? Quick maths. Somebody? Mwikali, tell us. It's not 2 million. Remember your costs. About 1.6 million, 20 puppies, okay, from those dogs. So you with your Shenzi dog, you'll never make anything. Those are the economics. I'll tell you a little joke, okay? Forgive me, guys. Some of you may not understand this. I'll explain. The difference between a Bobel or a Rottweiler and a Shenzi dog is when the thief comes, the Shenzi dog goes under the car. And from there it barks and says, "Win now, 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 now. Win now, 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 now." The Rottweiler barks and it says, "Who? Who are you? Who?" And it's a deep bark, and it stops the thief. Shindwa here, Shenzi dog. It has no income. So I keep dogs. And I'm trying to breed them and sell them simply because God has put it in my hands. Here's another one. What's that in my hands? I have a kitchen garden. And it does 2 things for me. Number one is that it removes the cost of going to buy essential vegetables and those sorts of things from neighbors. And I can save on the profit margin because I'm growing it myself. Number two is that in that kitchen garden, I have herbs and all sorts of things that I'm growing in it so that I can, in a sense, use them for my kitchen. And yes, the dead thing in my hand is that little patch of ground that has nothing on it, that I'm not doing anything with it, maybe even part of my lawn that is of no use to me except for the beauty of it. But when I take it, recognize its value, give it to God, and ask Him to use it, He will build something for me. Here's a third thing that I have in my hands. I have trees and the opportunity, because I've just started my farm, to plant trees. And I thought to myself, a lot of the trees I have will give me just dead wood and not be of much help to me. And of the three, because I love trees, of the about 300 trees that I have planted on my property, about 200 of them are fruit trees. Because they're beautiful. Mango trees are about the most shapely, the most beautiful tree you could ever have. But they will give me mangoes that I can eat and sell. I probably have about 30 avocado trees that are trees for my compound, but they will give me something else in return. I have probably about 30 mulberry trees, and I have macadamia trees, and they're all ornamental, beautiful for the garden I'm setting up. But each tree has to help me build wealth. You with your jacaranda, hakuna kitu. They say the jacaranda, nothing grows under the jacaranda. It's a very greedy tree. And they say the best jacaranda is the one in your neighbor's compound. You can see it and enjoy the color, but it drops all the leaves in their compound, not in yours. And so trees. Number 4 is I have rabbits. I keep rabbits. And I keep them for meat. They don't have names. And my kids aren't allowed to give them names. They don't have names, okay? I keep them for meat. But you know what the rabbits give me? The rabbits give me 3 things. Number 1 is they give me meat. And so we do eat rabbit meat at home, okay? But number 2 is they give me their susu. It is called susu power. You put that stuff on your sukuma wiki and boom, they're twice as big. You put it on spinach, boom, they're twice as green. I once asked my gardener, how come all of a sudden our sukumas and our spinach look so good? He told me, susu power. It's one of the best fertilizers. Seriously, I kid you not. There are people who go around farms asking whether you have rabbits and whether you can sell them the urine. Because it is such a good fertilizer. And even more than that, if you dilute it enough, then it also acts as an insecticide. And it repels bugs. And so I keep rabbits. And so you have a rabbit pet. Mine is creating wealth for me. Okay? What else do I have? I so happen to have bought a farm next to a river. And the source of water and blessing that it is isn't just it's beautiful to behold, but I'm trying to create wealth from that river next to us in 2 different ways. Number 1 is that I use it now to water. I'm next to a dam, and so there's abundant water where I am, and I use it to water my farm and for the crops I grow, and you can see the difference. But number 2, I thought to myself, we all love bodies of water and their beauty and etc. Now, I have to honor the riparian area when there is a permanent stream or a river. That's 30 meters from the center of the river coming up onto shore belongs to the government, and nobody's allowed to take up that space. Okay, it's public space and it belongs to the government. But I thought to myself, what if I start on this farm, I'm growing all this produce, what if I start a little weekend restaurant where you come on the weekends? Nairobians are always looking for a plot to go somewhere on the weekend, okay? Because you live in this concrete jungle, and on the weekend, you want to go out into the greenery, you want to go and see shambas and etc. What if I start a weekend restaurant? And I build it in such a way it overlooks the river. And then I beautify the river by planting the right trees and the right flowers, because nobody's against that. I'm not taking it up. I'm not fencing it. I'm not, saying it's mine. I simply plant the right trees and the right, flowers on it. Tell me you won't come for lunch and I will charge you for the lunch you come for. That river, even though not mine, is going to create wealth for me. What's that you have in your hands? I have chickens. And I use them to sell eggs. Now, I'm not a chicken farmer, but I'm trying to grow organic eggs. And I create what are called black soldier flies. So my eggs are bigger than normal because of the protein content from the black soldier flies. And I sell eggs. And they're creating wealth for me. What's that you have in your hands? Here are other things. You have a car that you can Uber with if you want to use your car that way. Or do school runs for kids in your neighborhood and make an income so that the car pays for itself and you're creating wealth from what you'd have spent on it. Some of you are good bakers here and you can start putting products on the market. My wife doesn't even eat her own cakes because she's, what is it called? Pardon? She's intolerant to wheat. What is it called? Gluten, yes. She's intolerant to gluten, so she doesn't eat her own cakes. She doesn't eat any wheat products. But she loves to bake. Why do you think I'm so big? She loves to bake. And I'm the one who tests and tastes and eats the cakes. But because she loves to decorate and to bake and etc., that is an income stream where you do cakes that you can sell, birthday cakes and whatever. And some of you are like that. Some of you are good at what you do in your career. You can become consultants in the very same field. Some of you here are good at telling stories and you can begin writing children's stories and even novels if God has given you that gift. As a pastor, one of the things that I have is I'm very connected to so many people because of the churches and the people I've met and the people who have been members of the church. And it is possible for me to use even those connections to enable big things to happen. And it doesn't have to be a dead gift in my hand. I can ask God for wisdom and ask God, what do I do with this gift you've given me of so many friends? One of the things that's important to my industry as a pastor is that I must be a trustworthy person. And so I know people look to me as one who has trust and a good name. And recently we were sitting with my wife and we were asking, what do we do with all the produce that we're producing on the market, in our farm, okay? 5 acres under vegetable crop and etc. What do we do with all this produce? And we said, we can go to Naivas, but there's a cartel that runs that. You can go to, the Mamamboga, the market, but, there's people who have that sorted out. We try to go and collect rubbish, the leftover spinach and such, so that we can use it on the farm. And there's a cartel who control that. And you just can't go with a pickup and say, give me rubbish. No. There's a whole system that runs the rubbish industry in the city council market, whatever market you go to, and you can't. We tried selling maize, put it on the back of a pickup, go and park somewhere, in Kitengela or somewhere, and there's a cartel that controls that section of the road, and you can't just park your car anywhere and sell, and etc., etc. So he said, what do we do with all this produce that we're putting up? And I said, we have worked very hard to produce produce that we can actually guarantee is well produced, has no chemicals that can make you sick, and etc., etc., etc. We're very careful about those things. If we have to spray, then there is a latency period where you say, do not eat this food for 7 days before the spray completely dissipates. And so you add another 7 days so that there is no question about the quality of food you're putting on the market. And I said, the one thing God has given us is he's given us trust. And if I give you my promise, prayerfully you can go home with it and say, the bishop gave me his promise that his food is clean. He's not putting hydrogen peroxide in his milk. He's not washing his meat with the chemicals that make it look redder. And it is good and clean and healthy. And that's trust. Dead in my hands if nothing is ever done with it. But God can use it to create wealth. That my promise, or as the English say, his word is his bond. The promise he gives, he will never go against. And it can be a blessing for me to create wealth. Caregiving, it is part of what it means to be a pastor. And we have made a commitment that on our farm, we're going to put up cottages where we can take care of elderly people, especially those slipping into dementia. Because there's a crisis in this city. When your mother or father, especially if they live in the city, grow elderly and need care, how will you do it when you hold a job that is a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 and you have a family to run and you're living in an estate? I don't know how many of you have cared for somebody with dementia and known how hard it is to give care to somebody with dementia. But that's our future. They say today that 80% of people growing elderly are going to have dementia. And so we're going to set up an elderly place for people with dementia. And you know the best thing about dementia? When you have dementia and I have dementia, dementia is that illness where you have no short-term memory. If I met you yesterday, I can't remember who you are. But if I met you 50 years ago, I have a very clear memory of where we met, what we talked about, etc., etc. My memory is from about 70 years to about 40 years ago. And then from 40 years, I don't remember. You don't remember your grandkids. You don't remember the husbands or the wives of your children, but you still remember your children from far back. The best thing about dementia is when I invite Pastor Faith and Bwana Mugera to come and stay on my property, okay, and they have dementia, okay, and I have dementia, we sit down in the morning and we tell the stories of long ago. But the jokes I told you yesterday, you can't remember them because you forgot. So I can tell them again tomorrow and the day after and the day after, and we're laughing and we're enjoying, but you have forgotten them within an hour and they're fresh. And so we want to take care of the elderly because we have the gift of caregiving that God has put in our hands. And what about leadership and all that you have learned in leadership? You don't retire and put it away. Even now, you can be mentoring and walking with others and training them and being wise as a mentor for them. And they can actually pay you to be their leadership coach. The big question is this, guys. What is in your hands that God has given you that you have never even looked at? But if you give it back to God, it will stop being dead in your hands and become a living thing. And you create wealth that way. Now, none of these things will create millions for you, okay? If I wanted my dogs to give me millions upon millions upon millions, I'd need to get something like 40, maybe 50 dogs, maybe even 100 dogs. I'd need to be on something like 50 acres. And I would need to build kennels for them. And I become an industry. And it's always about feeds and caring for them and training them and whatever else. That's a business. I don't want it to be a business. I want it to be something that creates wealth for me passively as I work where God has given me a career. Some of you can code and build apps without needing to be a profession. It's something you do in the evenings. And it's not a profession. And it will make 10,000, 20,000 every month, 50,000 ever so often. But if you have 6 or 7 of these, then that's a lot of money apart from your employment. This is how you create wealth. Let me show you an example in scripture of somebody who was doing exactly this. Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 2 says, invest in 7 ventures. Yes, even in 8. You do not know when disaster may come upon the land. One job is not enough. If you want to create wealth, invest in 7 ventures, maybe 8. And they're little things. You know, I have chicken on the side. I grow a vegetable garden. And all these are adding to what you have. Okay? So here's somebody in Scripture who does exactly that. And I'm talking about the noble woman in Proverbs chapter 31. Turn to it and let's read it together. It begins by saying in verse 1, a wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. Listen to this, and we're going to count together. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. So she's making cardigans or blankets, and maybe this is what she does in the evening, but she's creating wealth from a skill that is not her career, but something she does on the side. Okay? Number 2, she is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night and provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. So somehow she's marketing farm products. Number 2. Number 3, she considers a field and buys it. She's in the real estate business. Okay? Number 4, out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She's also a farmer. Okay? Number 5, she sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable. She's also trading, not only growing a vineyard, not only buying property, not only, making things from wool and flax, but she's also trading profitably. Maybe she runs a kiosk or something. Number 5, this is, I believe, listen to this. And her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps a spindle with her fingers. In other words, she has a cloth making wheel. You know the old type. Nowadays you do it in machines. But it used to be that you thread the needle through different strands of string and etc. and then use this thing to compress it and thread again. That's what a spindle is. And she grasps it and with her fingers and does not sleep at night. We go on. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed covers for her bed, and she is clothed in fine linen and purple. She's also making bed covers and her own clothes from home. Okay? You go on. Verse 23, her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the lands. She makes linen garments and sells them, and she supplies the merchants with sashes. In other words, she is a supplier to the merchants, and she's making linen garments and selling them on the market. You go on to verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gates. This woman in Proverbs 31, if you count, has something like 6 or 7 different side hustles where she's creating wealth. And my question to you today is, what's that in your hands that you have been given by God that can be a blessing to you, but you haven't even noticed it and you're not using it and it's not of any benefit to you? And yet to each of us, God has given us gifts. Maybe you are trained as a teacher and you went into business. But that gift of being able to sit with a child and help them understand is a gift you have sat on for the longest time possible. Maybe you're good at creating things with your hands, but you never bother. Maybe you're good at photography, but you've never thought of using it as an income generator. Each of us has about 10 of these different things that we have not harnessed, and they're sitting like the dead stick in Moses' hands that has not been identified, has not been named, and has not been given back to God to be a blessing to you. And so my question as we finish this series to you today is, what is that you have in your hands? And I want to challenge you to go home and this afternoon, this week, sit down and think through the things that God has given you, but they're lying dead. And you need to name them and own them and give them back to Him so that He can bless them. God bless you. Thank you.